Okay, hi everyone. This is a test recording for our presentation, our cultural presentation on the Chinese writing system, so Chinese characters and their evolution. So what you'll be doing is you'll be watching a video and I'll be with you down in the bottom corner of that video. And as you're watching the video, not only are we going to be talking to you about Chinese characters, but also there's a couple of videos that are linked from within the main video. So you'll see little notes during the video that says that please click on a particular image, and that will enable you then to watch a video that is associated with what we're talking about at the time. Cool. So forgive me, I'm reading off my PowerPoints here. Alright, so we're going to talk firstly about a writing system and what that is. So basically, a basic definition of a writing system is that it is a record of speech. So English and Chinese, they have two different types of writing systems in terms of how they record language. Now obviously English is an alphabetic, based on an alphabet system of recording language, of recording sound. It's a phonetic system for recording, whereas Chinese characters are called syllabic logographic, and we'll explain a little bit more about that as we go along, but essentially it means that one character represents one syllable, and we've talked about that in lectures before. So some examples, and you'll see these on your screen there. For example, 我是学生, 你好, which we've already learned, and 学习汉语. Now, we know Hanyu, we've done that from our lessons, but we haven't done 学习. 学习 means to study, so 学习汉语 means to study Chinese. So you can see how the sounds are represented by the characters, but the characters themselves don't necessarily directly tell you how to pronounce them, and that's where the system of pinyin is very useful. Okay, moving along. So what we'd look at now is the historical development of Chinese writing, and it goes back a long way. It goes back to 1300 BC. So that's over 3,000 years ago, and what we're talking about here is in terms of systems of writing, ancient systems of writing, where there's actual evidence has been found of these systems of writing, and the fact that they are systems. And the first one that we want to talk to you about is called the oracle bone inscriptions, and in Chinese that's 甲骨文. So we'll show you a picture of the jiaguwen, and the jiaguwen were actually carved on tortoise shells and carved on the bones of animals. And in the picture there you'll see the shoulder blade, which we've called a scapula, but that's just a shoulder blade of an animal, and you can see the characters that have been carved onto that bone there. And of course bone and tortoise shells were actually in their day were quite good materials for writing on or carving characters on, because they were relatively soft and they could be preserved for relatively long periods of time. So basically the system of jiaguwen, the system of bone inscriptions, was used from 1300 BC, as it says on the slide there, to about 1045 BC. So it's a couple of hundred years that was in use for. So essentially they're called oracle bone inscriptions because in those days the characters were written on the tortoise shells, were written on the bones as one instrument for telling fortunes, for telling the future, and so that was their main use, and that's why they're called oracle bones. An oracle is something that will tell you something about your future, and in this case it could have been more aligned towards the future of the empire, and you know, agriculture was the harvest. Were the harvest going to be good this year, and so on. So what I'd like you to do now is you'll see in this next slide, which is coming up, there is a picture there. Underneath it there is a URL. You don't actually need to click the URL. You can click on the image above it in this video, and that will then take you off to a YouTube video which you can watch, and then you can come back to this video. So we'll see you shortly, and we'll go on with the evolution of Chinese characters. Okay, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that video. So basically that was a video of not somebody carving the characters, but obviously somebody writing them with a calligraphy brush. But you get to see the general shape of the characters, and I'm sure by now you can see that, you know, they really don't look like anything that we're learning in our textbooks. So obviously they have evolved in terms of their shape and so on since then. Not just in terms of their shape, of course. Lots of characters were invented after the Jiaoguwen ceased to be used. So it's been a continual process of developing new styles of writing, but also developing new characters to represent new meanings. The next one we're going to look at is called the Zhou bronze inscriptions. So you can already see from the name there that the materials that were used for the inscription of these Chinese characters has changed. It's changed from bone and from tortoise shells to now bronze material, bronze implements, bronze vessels, and so on. And these were used between 1046 BC and 256 BC. So again, we're talking about a substantially long period of time. And quite often the inscriptions were carved on bronze vessels used for rituals. In fact, probably in the early days, I mean, in all throughout history, the majority of people in China have been illiterate, and it's really only been the elite who've actually had, you know, access to learning and been able to learn the writing systems of the time. And a lot of the writing that was done, a lot of the characters were used for ritualistic purposes. So what we're going to do is show you some examples of the Zhou bronze script, and you'll see three pictures there. The one on the left is a rubbing from a bronze, would be a bronze vessel of some sort, and they've actually rubbed, used, you know, ink or some other material, and then they've rubbed it onto a piece of paper there, and in that you can see the characters reasonably clearly. And as you can see, they still look, in a sense, rather, now I don't want to use the word crude because that's not right. I mean, it's a very highly developed system of writing, but if you look at the shapes, they're not as regular as the shapes that we're used to, for example, in our textbook. And I think you can imagine why, because when you're using a material like bronze, it's not that easy to make perfectly regular shapes and so on. In the middle you'll see a couple of ritual vessels or containers from the Zhou dynasty period, which have inscriptions on them, and also you'll see a sword that would have been used for, you know, rituals and things like that, and that has carvings of the characters. You can see the characters sitting below the picture. Right. So the next development, I guess the next stage in evolution that we're going to be looking at is from the Qin dynasty, which was 221 BC until 207 BC. Now, it's not particularly long, clearly, compared to the previous periods of history that we've been talking about. This is a relatively short period, but its impact on Chinese history right through until today has been significant. Now, there's been lots of dynasties in Chinese history where you know, their impact has been lasting for many centuries, including, well, a whole range of them. Probably the most famous in the West would be the Tang dynasty, and I guess we've all heard of Tang dynasty poems and so on. Clearly that's not the only one. I mean, it was a very prosperous period in Chinese history. That's not the only one that's had a long-lasting impact. But the Qin emperor, who was known as Qin Shi Huang, which means the first emperor, or the founding emperor, he was well, his contribution to history is quite amazing in the sense that at the time he was the first emperor really to unite a number of warring states. So China in those days wasn't one big country as it is now. The actual landmass of China was made up of a series of different, I guess you call them minor states if you like, who had varying degrees of independence. They had very complex relations between them. And so they were at war with each other. I think there were 6 states from memory. And the Qin dynasty and the Qin emperor ultimately succeeded in overcoming the other warring states and ended up becoming the ruling dynasty of a very large area of China and those other states. Now, Qin Shi Huang, the Qin emperor, I guess in some ways you could say was not a nice man. He was a very authoritarian and an extremely brutal emperor. But I guess, you know, if you're a man in his position and you're trying to control your own kingdom plus the other kingdoms that you've conquered, you're going to be constantly facing a lot of opposition. And so I guess in some ways, you know, brutality is just one way to ensure that the things you want to get done are done. Now he's famous for a number of things. He's famous for burning the books and for burying the Confucian scholars alive. So it's Keng Ru Fen Shu. And part of the reason he did that, of course, was because he was an advocate of change, certainly an advocate of change from some aspects of tradition. And in those days, Confucian scholars held, you know, quite a lot of power, quite a lot of influence, and they, being traditionalist, I guess, and again, you know, different scholars will have different views on this, but they, being traditionalists, they were not as in favour of change, and so in a sense they were an opposition force to the emperor. So the emperor, being a pragmatic person, basically made it very clear that if you opposed him, he would kill you, and that's what he did to many of the Confucian scholars that opposed him. The Fen Shu was also, in a sense, a break with the past, so he burned a lot of the historical texts. He ordered them to be burned. So it was a break with the past in that sense. It was also a way of, I guess, eliminating systems of writing or characters, if you like, that that didn't conform with the standard that he set. So in fact that's one of the things that he did, which has been lasting through until the modern era, and that is that he decreed that there would be one basic standard of writing characters. Now, I mean, fairly broad standard, but he aimed to standardize the system of writing, and in Chinese that's called Shu Tong Wen. It's part of a well-known Chinese saying. So he united the system of writing. Now what's interesting about that, well, sorry, before I go on about that, he also did some other things. He actually standardized the axle widths of carts, and you may think, well, what's the big deal about that? It's kind of interesting. Just very quickly, when I was younger in Australia, when you caught the train from Melbourne to Sydney, you had to actually stop on the Victorian-New South Wales border in a place called Albury-Wodonga, and the reason was because the rail gauge, the width of the rails was different in Victoria from New South Wales, and so the carriages would go from Melbourne to the border and they couldn't go any further because the rail gauge was a different width. You had to, I believe, get off the train and get on another one, but I've also heard they did have some system for lifting carriages off the wheels removing the wheels and then putting the new set of wheels on for the rest of the journey in New South Wales. Now that's in the modern world, and you can imagine the inefficiency of that. So over 2,000 years ago, the Qin Emperor was looking around, and many of the different states had different axle widths. So that meant that the roads were different widths. It meant that the ruts in the roads that the wheels made were different. So it made it very difficult for wheeled vehicles to go from one state to another. So being again a very pragmatic man, he basically decreed that we will make all axle widths the same, and so therefore he facilitated a much more efficient transport system, at least arguably. Right, so getting back to the unification of the writing system. So what was so amazing in my mind about what he did, and remember, it wasn't necessarily for altruistic reasons, or that he felt that this would be of a great benefit to China necessarily into the future. I mean, part of it is about political control, imposing his will excuse me, imposing his will on the states that he'd conquered. He united the system of writing. Until this day, all Chinese read the same system of writing. Now a little bit later on we're going to talk to you about the differences between traditional characters and simplified characters, but even despite those changes in more recent history, effectively the system of writing is the same in many aspects as it was back then, and regardless of where Chinese people are, where they come from, particularly within China, but this includes now areas outside of China where the Chinese have migrated to over the centuries and the millennia, they read the same system of writing. So when they look at the characters, essentially, now again there's of course exceptions, particularly I think in places like Hong Kong where they've actually made up a number of characters that suits their dialect, which don't exist in the standard Mandarin. But when people read the characters, they see the same meanings, essentially. Let me just say, well-written Cantonese is exactly the same as well-written Mandarin. Okay, people will tell you, oh yes, but Cantonese. When you read some Hong Kong newspapers, particularly some of the what would you call them? The lesser quality ones, they tend to write in a more spoken style, so they do tend to be different in terms of their syntax and their grammar and those and the characters and words they use. But a quality, well-written article in a Hong Kong newspaper, basically, with the exception of some local words, reads exactly the same as it would in Mandarin. So people in the mainland can read what's written in the Hong Kong newspapers and vice versa. So what you really have there, if you think about it, and okay, you can say there's no big deal, but I think it's amazing. What you have there is what's called globalization. So in a sense, what the Qin Emperor did was he globalized the system of writing. Everyone reads the same thing, same characters, same meaning. However, since his time to this day, people still retain their local, their regional spoken dialects. So as you probably well know, Cantonese sounds very different from Mandarin, sounds very different from Shanghainese. And if you've heard any of the other dialects in China, which I think I've talked about in the lecture, or we will talk about, you'll realize they sound extremely different. So the spoken languages, the dialects, are quite different, and some of the dialects, as I think they said in our textbook, are as different as Italian and French. They're often mutually unintelligible. So if a Shanghainese person goes to Beijing and speaks Shanghainese, most Beijing people, most Beijingers won't understand it unless they're from Shanghai originally, or they have some experience down in Shanghai. And likewise with a Cantonese speaker going to Shanghai and so on. So what you have there is localization. So to me this is amazing. Over 2,000 years ago, the Qin Emperor implemented a system of glocalization, where you have the global aspect of the system of writing, but you still have that local aspect of people speaking their dialects. Excuse me. Alright, so this is this think global, act local. So the Chinese are a mile ahead of us. Alright, so in this next slide you'll actually see an example of what's called the Qin small seal script. So this is the kind of script that was used on imperial seals. And again, that's an interesting story because even into the modern era in China, often when you're signing contracts or you're doing things at the bank, at least up until recent times, a signature was not enough. Not that long ago, banks would not accept signatures. You had to actually use a chop or a seal, okay, and you had to chop whatever the official document was. Now, obviously, the emperors had big seals, and they stamped into wax, and they also had the ink and so on. So this script, in a sense, was a script that worked well with a seal, which is something that needs to be carved into some kind of stone. So you can see an example there, and again, the characters still don't look very regular, not the way we're used to seeing them, not the way we're used to learning them. And if you look carefully at this example, you may actually see a couple of characters there that you'll recognize. I can see one that's tian for sky, day, heaven. Under that I can see one which is xia. So that's the character for. Now we learned this recently. That's the character for down or under, or in the case of 下课 to finish class. I can see some other ones there that we haven't learned yet, but you will before long. There's 介 as in 介绍, which means to introduce. I can see 景 which is the character for well, so it's like a, what do you call it, noughts and crosses grid. Some other characters, Huang, which is the character for emperor. So I guess what I'm demonstrating to you here, and I'm not an expert in ancient characters, I'm not an expert in classical Chinese, but already I can see characters from over 2,000 years ago that I can recognize. Some of the meanings may have changed a little bit over time, but essentially the basic meanings are the same. Alright, so that's the Qin small seal script. The next stage in our development is called the Han clerical script. So this was, as we say in our slide, was an evolution from the Qin clerical script, which was maybe referred to as the vulgar script. It's like a common script used by common people. And this Han clerical script was used side by side with the small Qin small seal script. So it's often referred to as 楷书, and it's much more regular than what we've seen so far. So let's have a look at a picture of, again, these are rubbings, I guess. Some of these pictures come out of ancient texts, and others are rubbings off carvings. It could be a big stone, a memorial or something like that, or it could be a bronze vessel or whatever. But anyhow, if we have a look at the characters here for this clerical script, they're more regular. They're starting to look a lot like the characters that we're used to seeing today, the kinds of characters that we write today. And again, I can see a few characters there. Guang is one character I can see that I recognize. Liang. There's another one, Wu, which means a goods or a thing. I can see Yu, which means rain. I can see Hou, which means after, and so on. So again, we're still talking back about 2,000 years ago, but already by then the script as Chinese characters have started to evolve into something that we're much more familiar with today, particularly in terms of their shape and so on. So they're much more regular than the previous ones. Okay, so really, essentially, what we're using today is I guess, uh, built on this hand clerical script. Okay, so what I want to talk to you now about briefly is just the situation with traditional characters as against simplified characters. Now, I'm sure you're all aware of the differences. You'll probably know that traditional script, or in Chinese it's called complex characters, they're used in places like Taiwan, Hong Kong, but also in overseas countries where there are well-established Chinese communities. Part of the reason for that, so for example, the USA, but even Australia up until say 20 years ago, where traditional or complex characters were widely used, particularly in the local Chinese media. Now, why do I say established Chinese communities? Because often in these places, the Chinese that established those communities a long time ago mostly came from the south of China. Of course, they came in a historical period where traditional characters were still used, and they've maintained that use of traditional characters even until today. So a lot of the printed press and so on, even the websites, Chinese language websites in, for example, the USA, are still in traditional characters. And if I'm not wrong, I think most American universities, tertiary institutions that teach Chinese still teach complex traditional characters. But in countries like Singapore, for example, they've adopted the simplified system, and of course, simplified characters are used broadly, everywhere on the mainland in China, partly by government decree. The process of simplification, again, was an interesting one. It happened in several stages back in the 40s and 50s. I guess it was for a number of pragmatic reasons. Throughout most of history, most Chinese people have been illiterate, and of course that's got to do with standard of living and so on. And people traditionally didn't get very good education. Really, life was about survival. To be able to get a good education, you had to have sufficient wealth, I guess, to be able to withdraw from any kind of labor and focus on your studies. So Chinese characters essentially were too hard for Chinese to learn, and I guess for a lot of history they didn't really need to learn it. Now, I mean, literacy rates in China now are actually very high. They're up in the, well, I don't know, is it 80 or 90%? They're very high. So there was, I guess, a thought that if the characters were simplified, that it makes them easier to learn. Certainly, there was a little bit of an argument for pinyin along those lines, that it's easier for less educated people to learn. There were several waves of simplification, but the final wave, which I don't recall, I think it's in the late 50s or the 60s, eventually was actually was cancelled because it went too far. And there is this big argument about, well, so much is lost if the characters are oversimplified, in the sense that as we will see shortly when we talk about it, characters represent different objects within the world. They represent different concepts and so on, and when you simplify them, you're losing some of that history, I guess, and some of that cultural content. But the interesting thing about simplified characters is that even though, I guess, in a sense, by government decree, that's what's being used in mainland China, traditional characters are actually making a comeback. And you'll find that many businesses, particularly in their shop signs, will use, the name of the shop will use traditional characters. And the other thing is, if you end up ever doing business with the Chinese, have a look at their business cards. And you'll actually see that quite a lot of mainland business people actually use traditional characters on their business cards. And again, there's an aesthetic quality to those traditional characters, those complex characters, that some people feel are missing from the simplified characters. Right, let's have a look at some examples of characters over time as they've evolved. So what you should be seeing now is a table of the different scripts over time, and the ones that we've talked about today. starting with the oracle bone and finishing with simplified. So it gives you, a good idea of how characters have evolved from very early on, more picture-like to now being more abstract. And you can see that process, how it's gradually developed to the characters that we know today. The other thing about that table is it does give you some good examples of simplified characters and their traditional or complex versions. So you can have a look at that. So now we just talk briefly about Chinese characters and how they were invented. So we really have three main types of characters. Started off with pictographs, and it tells you fairly, clearly in the name that these were characters that represented things in the physical world. So if we go back to, well, you can't, this is a video, so if you think back to the table before, or you can stop the video and you can rewind a little bit, look at the table before, you'll see the character, for example, for, let's have a look, the character for I, which is mu, and you can see how that originally was drawn like an eye. Even if you look at the character for horse, and I know you guys know this character, ma, you can see that it started out looking, not like a very hyper-realistic representation of a horse, but looking a little bit like a horse, and how over time it's changed. If you look at lin, which is the character or the word for forest, you can see that originally it started off looking like a couple of trees that were put together. So pictographs, I guess in some senses, was the starting point. It's much easier to develop a system of writing where you're actually drawing things that you see. But of course that's very limited. You get to a point where you start to have some abstract ideas, abstract things that you can't see, you can't touch, you can't smell, you can't feel, and you need to express them somehow. So they've had to start to develop some other characters which are called associative characters. So they're really associating the character with an abstract concept. And sometimes those are built on pictographs, or they're built on combinations of a couple of pictographs, but in a lot of cases complete new shapes were developed. And then we also have the semantic phonetic compounds as a further development. So what that means is the characters are made up of these two parts. One part, the semantic part, gives you an indication of the general category of meaning, and we've talked about this briefly in the lectures before. So it's a general category of meaning, and we talked about the word for mother, mama. Excuse me. And the fact that on the left hand side you have the character for female, nu, and so that gives you the information that this character is associated with the general category of female. So it's not going to give you a precise meaning, but it is going to give you that general meaning category. On the other side, and it's not necessarily left-right, it can be top-bottom, and you'll see some demonstrations of that shortly. On the other side, you'll see there is the phonetic component. Now again, Chinese characters are not inherently phonetic. But I guess you could say, English alphabetical letters are not inherently phonetic. I mean, why is the shape A pronounced as A? Well, because we said that's the way it's going to be pronounced, and everyone learns that. So in some senses, some Chinese characters are like that, where people know, okay, that character is that sound. When it's then combined with a semantic component, sometimes it will retain that sound, won't necessarily retain the tone, and it won't retain the meaning, because it's there for phonetic purposes, in other words, to convey the sound. Sometimes, though, the sound will change slightly, so sometimes just the initial will change, but the final will stay the same. And in other cases, the sound changes completely. So in those cases, clearly the phonetic component is not reliable. So again, it's an indicator of sound. It's not 100% reliable by any means, but you may be able to guess roughly what the meaning is. So moving along, we'll have a look at some examples of pictographs. Now, One of these you already know, absolutely. Okay, so the word for people, 人, 人. Okay, so you can say, well, it doesn't look like a person, but if you look back at the original characters, it was drawn like a person with a head and arms and legs. So the head's gone, the arm's gone, the legs are still there. But again, it's an abstract image of a person. 木, 木 for tree. Again, it's been abstracted a little bit, but you can see the horizontal line, which represents the earth. You can see the lines underneath, which represent the roots, and you can see the trunk of the tree just above the line. Okay, so and then we've got the dagger, 戈, 戈. So there's some examples of pictographs. There's lots more where those came from. Now, the next one we're going to look at, just briefly, is the associative characters. So again, just to remind you, these are the ones where we're trying to express something abstract. So we can't rely on the character looking like the thing that we're trying to express. So some examples of them are, for example, now this first one you guys know. You guys know. 修, 修. And we've learned it in the lectures and maybe also in the tutorials and seminars. In the expression 我们现在休息一下，我们现在休息一下。So 休 is part of the word for 休息, 休息, which means to rest. 休, and we've demonstrated there how that word was made up of two parts into a new compound word to express an abstract idea. So we've got 人, people, and we've got 木, a tree. And it doesn't take a lot of imagination to picture a person when they're tired and wanting to rest, finding a nice tree to sit underneath and have a bit of a snooze, have a bit of a sleep. Okay, so we've got the character 伐, 伐, which means to attack. Now again, it involves people, so we've got 人, and it involves our dagger, 戈, and when we put them together, we get this new compound character, which doesn't look like an attack. I mean, there's just no way when you look at it that it looks like an attack. But because of this compound, one can then, express this abstract concept. And then we've got 林 for woods or forests. So we've got two of them together to express the idea of, two trees together to express the idea of multiple trees, therefore a forest. The final one is the semantic phonetic compound, and that in Chinese is called 形声字. My apologies, I've been very remiss. I haven't actually told you how to say the words pictograph, associative character in Chinese. So pictographs are 象形字. You'll see it on the slide in the video. 象形字. Okay, so that's shapes that are like something in reality. And then we've got 会意字, 会意字. These are the associative ones. So they're relating the characters to some kind of abstract meaning. And then the final one, this is the one that we're about to talk about, the semantic phonetic compound, is called 形声字. 形声字. The 形 is the I guess the semantic side of it. It means shape, but it also it means that's the semantic part of it. 声 sheng is the word for sound. So that's the phonetic part. And so we have the example there of 认, 认, to recognize. And we'll be learning that, I think, in lesson 2 or 3. It also can mean to know somebody, to get to know somebody. So that's made up of the speech radical 言, 言, and we've showed you in brackets the full character, and then next to it is the modified version of the character, which when they have radicals they change the shape of the character, the look of the character, to simplify it, because it's going to form part of another character. And we also have on the other side 人, 人, which is person. Now, the part 人 for person, it's not there for its meaning, it's there for its pronunciation. But if you notice, the tone is different. So for person, it's 人, 人, and for this character to recognize or to know somebody is 人, 人. So it's a fourth tone. Okay, so writing Chinese characters, again, you guys may already be, well ahead on this. So there's a number of rules to follow, and it's to do with the way strokes are written, but more particularly, when I say the way they're written, so if they're written from left to right, right to left, from top to bottom, whatever, in terms of the actual stroke itself. But in terms of putting the strokes together to make a character, there is an order, there is a sequence in which they must be written. And we have to remember that these are being written, not drawn, so we're not drawing pictures. Okay, so hopefully on your screen now, if we've timed this video right, you will have an example of the first basic rule of order, and that is left, then right. Now, if you click on that image of the character 人, it will demonstrate that rule. So what I'd suggest is that you click on the image. That will open another page, another web page, and there's a very brief, it's only a couple of second video on that. And when you've had a look at that, you can come back to this video. Okay, welcome back. So the next the rule of basic stroke order is top, then bottom. And we have the character there, and again, I think you guys probably are already familiar with it. The character 家, 家, you certainly heard me use it. When I greet you all at the beginning of a lesson, I say to you, 大家好, and that's the 家 for family, for home. So that character is written from the top to the bottom, okay, and then left to right. So if you click on that image, again, this will take you over to another web page, and there'll be a short video on there. When you've finished watching that, come back and we'll continue on with the next one. Okay, welcome back. So now we're going to look at the final basic stroke order rule. There's some other rules, and I've got information up on Moodle for you to have a look at that. But we're just sticking to a couple of the most common basic ones. And this is outside and then inside. Okay, so this is the character 国, 国, which you guys have learned. 你是哪国人? So what I'd like you to do now is just to click on that image, have a look at how it's written, and you'll see how you start with the outside and then you go to the inside and so on. And you'll notice, I mean, 国 is a good example where a couple of the rules are combined together. So it's outside, and we go inside, and we go top to bottom. So 1, 2, 3, 4, left to right. Alright, so we'll see you shortly. Welcome back. Okay, so finally we're just going to talk briefly about Chinese calligraphy. So calligraphy has been considered as a high-level art form for literally thousands of years, and it requires years of hard work to achieve. So we're not, I'm sure most of you are familiar with calligraphy. We're not talking about just writing characters in everyday life with a pen or pencil or a brush or whatever. We're talking about what is essentially a very high art form. In fact, there are a number, I mean, all throughout history, but even in recent history, famous calligraphers, their works are actually worth a lot of money. So for us in the West, we treat calligraphy as something that we use when we're doing a wedding invitation or a birthday card, something like that. It's never really been considered as a form of art. I mean, you could argue historically with the Bible, back when the Bible was copied by hand by the monks. Quite often they would start a new scripture or a new gospel with the first letter being beautifully drawn you could argue that is at the level of a work of art. There's no question. But in the modern world, we don't really view Western calligraphy of English alphabet or whatever as something that you'd be really willing to pay a lot of money for. In China, it is definitely something that people have a huge appreciation for. Not everyone is into calligraphy, but you'll find a lot of Chinese people are into calligraphy. They are able to pick what is good and what is not so good. And it's something that they have the ability to really appreciate, whereas I guess from our perspective, because it's not our native language and it's not our native writing system, it's very hard for us to appreciate it. So what I thought I would do is, you'll see hopefully now a picture there of a gentleman writing some calligraphy. What I'd like you to do is to click on that, have a watch of that video, and that'll give you a good idea of not only how the character is written using a calligraphy brush, and you'll be able to see how hard it is to master that. You'll notice that his hand is not actually resting on anything. He's writing with his hand in the air. That takes a lot of muscle control, a lot of practice. But the other good thing about the video is that it also demonstrates some of these different stages of evolutions of characters that we've been talking about tonight. So click on the picture there. It'll take you to a separate web page. Have a look at the video and then come back. I'll be waiting for you. Okay, welcome back. Welcome back. How was that? It's pretty amazing calligraphy. So if you get the chance to go to China or Taiwan or anywhere like that to study, you can actually do calligraphy courses. I'm sure you could probably find someone here to teach you as well. It's a fantastic hobby to have. So to wrap up, we actually have a quiz at the end of this. So what I'd like you to do is, when you finish watching this video, to go back to the Moodle web page for your unit and to complete the quiz on this week's cultural presentation. And just to help you a little bit along the way, you should be now seeing the 5 questions that we've set up for this week's quiz. So I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. If you have any questions about Chinese characters, their evolution, their structure and so on, please feel free to talk to us. Dr. Chen Lao Shi, is an expert in Chinese characters, so she'd be more than happy to talk to you about it. And certainly we'll be talking about Chinese characters and so on in the classes throughout the semester. But hopefully we've given you a bit of an appreciation of this amazing system of writing and the culture and the history behind it. All right. There's some further reading that's here. I'll put that further reading also on the Moodle site so that you can actually copy and paste. So if you're interested in any of this sort of stuff, the stories behind the calligraphy, behind the evolution of the characters, the dynasties and so on, there's some references there for you to go and have a look at. Okay, thank you all for your patience, and we'll see you in class.